Have you ever wondered why some voices get heard and others just get lost in the noise? It's not luck, it's actually strategy. And today we're talking with Summer J, a leadership expert, autistic ADHDer, and proud neurodivergent leader. She didn't just show up. Listen, everybody, she actually makes people pay attention. And we're going to break down the moments that changed everything for her, the strategies that worked, and maybe talk about some of the ones that didn't work as well. And if you're interested in standing out, not blending in, this one is for you. And I am Matt Halloran. I've spent years helping experts just like you build their authority and grow their influence. If you're ready to stand out, this podcast is your blueprint, offering real strategies to make your voice rise above the noise. All right, Summer, how you doing?
I'm doing so great. I am very happy to be here. I've been looking forward to this for a while.
And I, as a fellow ADHDer, man, that's not easy to say. I'm super happy to talk about some of this stuff because those are some of the superpowers we're going to talk about on the show today. But so when, we're in a crowded space, especially in the space that you're in, we're in a crowded space in financial services. And from a leadership perspective, you're in somewhat of a crowded space. When did you realize that really leaning into the summerness, right, helped you really rise above the noise? When did you realize you needed to do that?
It was in the beginning, and I'll never forget, I had joined the National Speakers Association, and I was talking to somebody, and I had this idea of what people would want, and I was telling somebody who would become a mentor what that idea was. And she says, wait a minute, don't you have a master's? And I said, yeah. She says, what's it in? I said, leadership. She says, didn't you work at a big company? And I said, yeah, I worked at Disney. She said, what'd you do? And I said, leadership. And she says, do you like leadership? And I said, yeah. And she says, do you have a unique way of looking at it? I said, well, I've been told. And she said, so why don't you do that instead? And so that really helped me understand to not chase what I think people want, but instead start figuring out, what am I really good at? What do I have expertise in? Where can it make money? And where can I offer value? And so bringing all of those things together, it was talking about unlocking the magic of leadership.
Yeah. I have found, and in fact, I was just talking to a friend of mine earlier today, that sometimes getting that external validation and or permission can really help give you the confidence to truly lean into, in your situation, you're leading with weird, really leaning into who you are and what you're doing. Okay. Now here's the $1 billion question, right? When did you actually feel it happening that you were really rising above the noise?
So it was actually during COVID. So I started my business in 2019 and then restarted it in 2020, as many of us did. And there was a competitive advantage that I never expected. And that competitive advantage was that there was a lot of other speakers before me that were amazing, phenomenal platform speakers, but they didn't know how to do virtual. Since I didn't know anything, I was able to quickly shift into virtual, and I got my message out very quickly. And so in doing that, I unintentionally took advantage of a pretty rough situation to set myself ahead of the crowd. And then once that happens, then it was really figuring out what my voice was. And I found that the more I leaned into who I am versus what I think people want, the more that people just started listening.
Yeah. I've said this before on the show, and I have a feeling I'm going to be saying it often. One of the things so my wife was a retired biology and earth sciences teacher, and many people think it's the strongest species that survive. It's not. It's actually the most adaptable, and that is you in a nutshell, right? Being flexible and not leaning into what you've already known, and just being vulnerable and realizing that you need to take on new things. That's the magic. That's the part of the magic, right? I mean, and so let's, I'm going to get dorky with you here for a minute, because I love talking about leadership and I love how your brain works. How does that adaptability, how does that help with leadership?
Well, and so it's interesting because I started my speaking business in 2019, but I didn't get my neurodivergent diagnosis until 2020 or 2025, 2024. So I got autism first. It was autism with ADHD tendencies. Then I started my PhD program, and the ADHD tendencies became a lot bigger than just tendencies. And so I went back, got the diagnosis for ADHD. And it's been a really interesting journey, hard on some points, but also really interesting because I was able to see all of those things that were both my superpower and I was trying to hide were linked to the way that my brain uniquely shows up. And so by getting the diagnosis and having these conversations, and now I study it as part of my PhD program, and this is where I'm slowly shifting my business to, is as a neurodivergent professional, how do we help other professionals succeed in the workplace? And how do we help leaders of neurodivergent professionals help them succeed in the workplace? And so as we're going through and thinking about it, it's really been this 44-year journey where it's helping to understand what was kryptonite as a kid is now superpower as an adult. What does that look like? And how can I keep it as a superpower and teach others how to turn theirs into a superpower as well?
How many leaders do you see that actually fall within the neurodivergent categories that you're currently studying?
A lot more than we think, because so many times when we think about neurodivergence, specifically autism and ADHD, so I'm going to geek out for just a second, but I'll bring it back, I promise. When we think about neurodivergence, the umbrella term neurodivergence covers a lot of things. Dyslexia, I know all of these things, and my brain just went, we're not going to play fake. So it's dyslexia, autism, ADHD, dysarrhythmia, any way that it's our brain thinks differently, including being left-handed. We have a lot of research about things like dyslexia and, of course, being left-handed, but the research around autism and ADHD was stuck in a very, very specific mold. And it was high support for both, as well as primarily boys. So as adults, many of us got lost because we didn't fit in what that looks like. And so when we think about neurodivergent, I kind of think most of us are neurodivergent to a certain extent because we all think differently based on a variety of things. But when we're thinking about the diagnosis of autism and ADHD, which is the most popular that people are talking about right now, it's more than we think. It's not everybody, obviously, but it is more individuals than we think, both in leadership as well as those that are individual contributors and on front lines.
When I was in grad school to become a therapist, one of the things that happens is you think you have every mental disorder, like as you start, it happens in medical school too. Right. And so, my friends would be coming up to me in school and saying, oh my God, man, I think I have this. What do you think? And the professor was very clear, Summer, and said, look, you guys are all going to think that you have, schizophrenia because you've got a tape playing in your brain. Right. But the difference is, and I think this is one of the things culturally that we need to pay attention to, is in order to have a diagnosable disorder, it needs to actually interrupt ADLs, activities of daily life. It needs to be disruptive to a specific level. And so I think a lot of us are, because it's spectral, right? And that's not just, I'm not referring to autism exclusively. Mental illness is spectral. You can have little bits of this in here and there, but when it actually becomes disruptive in your life, like both you and I actually have gotten to the point of a diagnosis of it being disruptive in our life. I've got medication resistant ADHD. There's nothing that works. And so I've had to learn my own coping mechanisms to be able to go ahead and satisfy that. But I digress. All right. I love pulling right up next to you, sister, because I love how your brain works, because it makes me feel like I'm not alone, which is so cool. Now, I'm going to challenge you here. So you're in the room with the top 1% of leaders. As a leadership coach, what is one thing that you could tell them that you think would just change everything?
Leadership is not supposed to be easy, but it's also not nearly as complicated as we make it. And so when we think about trying to lead others, the most common question that I get is, Summer, what is the right leader? And my answer is always the same. It depends. It depends on the situation. And so I was an extraordinary leader, if I do say so myself, and so humble while I was at Walt Disney World. I worked really well with the cast members and in the situations that I was in, because it was high chaos, high energy, constantly changing. I never got bored. Whereas I worked in internal auditing for a hot second, and I was not made for that.
Ooh.
It was not okay. Everybody knew it, including me and my boss. And so I made it about 6 months. And so when we think about this concept of trying to be the right leader for everybody, there is no such thing. It's identifying who you are, what your strengths are, and what type of industry and environment does that make the most sense. And then the biggest piece, again, it's not as complicated as we have to make it. When we get out of our own way as leaders, all of a sudden leadership starts getting fun because we're making an impact. We're having conversations. We're driving results for our organizations. So many times we just plant ourselves in the way and we refuse to move.
That rigidity has always been something my favorite leaders in my professional growth and development have always been the ones who've pulled up next to me. What can I do to help you, but still guiding me in the direction for the overall, goals and vision for the company. All right. So everybody knows this now on this show there's going to be a summer playbook, right? And so these are going to be the things that we're going to distill from this episode that are actionable items that our audience can take away and implement within their current existence immediately. So let's talk about the 3 things that you think are the best tactics to truly help you not just grow your audience, but also accelerate your influence and grow your authority.
Yes. Now, my ADHD brain is having a moment. Can I get a reminder of those?
You can. Oh, that makes me so happy. All right, because I'm so happy I get to say this out loud. Lead with your weird.
Yes. Okay. So when we think about leading with weird, when I started considering transitioning my business from unlocking the magic of leadership into the neurospicy workplace, which it's brand new, so it's still working on it. What made it happen was when I got my autism diagnosis, it was a big deal. Like, I'll never forget when I was talking to the psychiatrist at the assessment center. I shared that I have really high anxiety and it centers around my daughter. And she said, would you say that you're hyper-focused on your daughter? And I said, yeah, that's a really good way of putting it. And she said, research has shown that for boys and men with autism, they hyper-focus on things that we've traditionally thought of, trains, dinosaurs, wars, things like that. Whereas girls and women traditionally tend to hyper-focus on people. And that was such a huge turning point because I'd always done it, but I didn't know why I did it. And so having language to be able to speak this was really powerful for me. And I wanted to share that with individuals that follow me because maybe it would be powerful for them. And what I found was that when I led with my weird, Matt, it was insane. I got so many emails and so many comments and it is still to date my highest viewed video that I've put out. And I started seeing that when I would talk about my experiences being neurodivergent in the workplace, as a parent, as a spouse, all of these things, my people started finding me. And so that's what it comes back to is, again, we think we have to be everything for everybody instead of focusing on finding your people and finding those people that need to hear your message in the way that you share them. Because when we think about leadership, there's nothing new in leadership. Yeah, there's nothing new in leadership. And so when I talk about leadership, I talk about it from my perspective in my voice. And when people hear that, they either connect or they don't. Those that connect choose to go along the journey with me. And so we have been raised in a world, specifically in the United States, but in a lot of other societies too, to conform, that when we stick out, there's pain and there's danger. But if you're wanting to make an impact and you're wanting to find your people, you have to lead with the weird. You have to lead with those things that are uniquely you and nobody else, and then let your people find you.
And they do. And you're living proof of that. I mean, the model that we built here at ProudMouth is absolutely leaning into that, unapologetically being yourself. And again, much like we said at the top of the show, giving yourself that permission or having somebody give you that permission, which, by the way, is a huge reason why we've reset the show and started the Rise Above the Noise podcast, because I want people to see themselves in people like you and realize, oh, crap, I want to lean into my weird. I want to lean in more to who I am and what makes me different. All of the super cool people that we all look up to, they didn't follow the crowd. I'm going to get old school here. You look at Fonzie from Happy Days, didn't settle in. He wasn't part of the Cunningham family. I mean, he was his own lone wolf. And a lot of times, if you really truly want to rise above the noise, leaning into that is so important. Now, you also just previewed your second point, which is say something real that needs to be heard. And that high performing post, let's deconstruct that a little bit more, if you don't mind.
Sure, absolutely. So when we think about saying something real that needs to be heard, we can say a lot of real things that don't necessarily need to be heard or that everybody else is saying, right? Yeah. I have a whole lot of big truths that not everybody needs to hear. But when I'm thinking about my brand and my business, so transitioning into the neurospicy workplace, what are those things that I want people who are my tribe to hear And what are those things that maybe other people aren't telling them or aren't telling them in a way that they can hear it? So right now, my PhD research is focused on the fact that so much research states that people with autism do not make effective leaders. I disagree with that very strongly for a whole multitude of reasons. And I'm not going to go in the research because when I geek out on this, we're going to be here for a minute. But what we're finding is there is a specific style of autism. It's called the female autism phenotype, even though it's not just for female, but it's primarily in females. And because of the societal expectations and the way our brains are built, we do a higher level of masking. So putting on the mask that makes us safe in an environment. That also makes us extraordinary leaders, because we're able to see what's happening with individuals. We're able to pick up on those cues that maybe nobody else is picking up on. And so when I stand up and say that, yes, autistic people can make good leaders, that's something that needs to be heard. And then I bring the research and my own experience to back it up. And so when you're thinking about your tribe, your message, what is that thing that they need to hear in the unique way that you can say it that maybe nobody else is telling them, or maybe nobody else is telling them in the way that they need to hear it?
Now, you've used the word magic a number of times already in the show, and your third point has to do with delivering magic. So let's talk about that.
So my background is hospitality, and I always worked in luxury hospitality. So ski resorts and dude ranches and Walt Disney World. And what I realized through all of those experiences, but it was really driven home at Disney, is anybody, considering restaurants, anybody can flip a burger, anybody can sell a burger. Mm-hmm. But not everybody can do it in a way that when people walk in, they're immediately smiling, that when people walk in, they're excited to be there. And so when we think about leadership, it's creating that unique magic for that organization, or when we think about entrepreneurs trying to get their message out, that unique magic for what they do, and then raising it above. So we're not trying to be average. If you are listening to this podcast, you do not want to be average. And so stop trying to conform. Yeah. Find those things that work beautifully for you and then take it to that next level. If you want to be bougie, be bougie. If you don't want to be bougie and you want to go to this certain audience, go to that audience. But do it in a way that they trust you, that they know that what you say has an impact and it is true, and that you're delivering value before asking anything else. Because when we can do that, that's where the magic comes in, that you can trust me and you know that I'm delivering value and I'm here for you, right? I want to eat and live indoors, so I make a profit off of what I do. But I can make a profit doing it a lot easier working for an organization. Yeah. And so I'm here because I couldn't imagine being anywhere else. And people can feel that that's magic. And so thinking about, as an entrepreneur, as you're trying to be heard, what is that thing that only you can do? And then lean in.
So much of what's going on, and we've had conversations about AI on this show. We've had conversations about, we've lived in financial services for quite a while. And a lot of the stuff that experts, regardless of if you're in financial services, if you're a doctor, if you're a leader, or, any of those sorts of things, is we really lean into what, is referred to as table stakes, right? The things that everybody has access to, but we've put our little spin on it. What I'm hearing from you is that isn't enough. It is that, what is the extra? It's not just your spin on an existing thing. It's like the burger flipping, right? How can you make it feel personal? And everybody who's an expert who really truly wants to grow their authority needs to really lean into, how do I make my ideal prospect and my existing clients feel like I'm the only one that can deliver this? Yeah. And you said something earlier, Summer, that I didn't actually know. Well, I mean, I knew hyperfocus from an ADHD standpoint, and I did know a hyperfocus more, but I didn't realize it was called hyperfocus, more of like obsessive sort of things, fixations on one specific thing, trains, dinosaurs, things like that. Mm-hmm. How do you talk to leaders? How do you use hyperfocus in your life to your advantage?
So a couple of things that I want to talk about here, and I'm probably going to lose my train of thought, but we'll get back there, I promise. One of the things you mentioned, AI, and there's a lot of conversations around AI. And the one thing that I want to hit on is Denise Washington, who is a fellow speaker. She said something that completely stopped me in my tracks. She said, AI will not replace people. AI will replace people who are not using AI. And so when we're thinking about it, I use AI. Her name is Ruth. She's my research assistant and my marketing buddy. But I have taught her how to speak in my voice. And I always make sure I'm the last one that categorizes what goes out. So it is always my voice. So when you're thinking about, especially for entrepreneurs, because it's so powerful, don't be afraid to go into these AI systems and start teaching them who you are and what that looks like. Now, when we consider the next piece, which, Matt, I'm so sorry, my friend. Hyperfocus. Thank you. And see that I hyperfocus on answering and then completely lose all of the other things. So when we think about hyperfocusing, hyperfocusing can benefit us, but it can also be a kryptonite in a big way because we can get so sidetracked on what we're working on that we lose everything else. So it's using hyperfocus as the tool that it is, as the ability to get stuff done very quickly and very well, but also making sure that we're keeping an ear out as to what's happening around us. And so when I coach individuals, it's creating moments that they know they can hyperfocus. Like I know my highest productivity time is from 10 to 12. I try and keep that blocked out. So when I need to do hard stuff, I can hyperfocus. I don't get interrupted. Some individuals, when they think about hyperfocus, they're like, okay, I'm going to work for 30 minutes and I'm going to walk away. And this is where the personalization comes in. If that works for them, then by all means do that. When I hyperfocus, if I have to walk away, I'm gonna be a little upset. And so I will hyperfocus for an hour and a half to 2 hours before I walk away and then take a 30-minute break. So it's understanding, just like everything else, hyperfocus is a tool in our toolbox. And it's a tool when we learn how to use it in the best way for us. But like last night, I'm working on these assessments that I told you about. At 6 o'clock, they just weren't done. And I had to force myself to walk away because I've been hyper-focused on it for about 7 hours. And so recognizing what it is, how it shows up for you, and how to use it and not let it control you.
I love that. I think that there's a lot of people that are in my life personally who fall into these categories. And it's very interesting to see how my hyperfocus is very, very different than their hyperfocus. My hyperfocus is a lot more like what you were talking about. I work in very short, intense bursts of energy, and then I have to take a break, right? I have to do what I call a brain cleanse. Sometimes it's I stand, off camera. I don't know why I do that, but I do, and jump around, right? Sometimes I literally have to go for a walk and just breathe for 10 minutes. But what that does is that gives me that reset in order to come back and just nail it. Right. And now, like, my son is a good example. I mean, his hyperfocus can last 5 hours. 5 hours. It's unbelievable. I can't imagine being able to focus on one thing for 5 hours. But that's where his happy place is. And, we talk about flow state, and I'm not going to digress into all of that today, but, hyper focus can really be that flow. And when you start learning to navigate that, and that's one of the reasons why you offer coaching services, which is why I wanted to talk about this, because having somebody who understands, who's walked in your shoes, but of course it's your shoes, Summer, making it so that they can really understand, and you can, again, pull up next to somebody as a leader, you being a leader to help them, I think is really, really important. Now, we have to get to the rubber meets the road here.
Okay.
Because you've talked about the community, you've talked about being able to attract the right people, but what strategies have worked for you to really build the strong community that you've built?
So that's one of the things where I have found the battle with trying to conform versus being true to myself. So when we think about effective communities, it's Facebook pages where the community owners are engaging once or twice a day, doing all of these things. That doesn't work well for me. And so what I have found is every week for the past 4 years, I put out a video on Monday and it goes out to my email list, my social media platforms, consistently goes out. I only took a break for 6 weeks because of a family tragedy. And so when I'm putting these out, and then I'll go to a conference, I will have people stop me, say, I look forward to it every week. Or you put out this video on how to handle conflict and it was the perfect timing. Or I send it to my entire team. And so my community tends to be a quieter community. And it tends to be because with ADHD, we do the out of sight, out of mind, which is interesting because we do it with people too. So sometimes we forget our relationships, even though they're really important if it's out of sight, out of mind. And I found that my people find me and they appreciate that we're engaging and we're engaging on our own time and there's no pressure to engage. So it was interesting. Again, I I went into the trap of I had to be like everybody else. I tried it one time and it was miserable for them and miserable for me. And I went back to what I'm doing, which is consistently every single Monday. And they know they can email me at any time. I respond to all of my own emails. My team does not respond for me and my voice. I do that. And so when they need me, I'm here. When they don't need me, I'm in the background cheering them on. And that's what works for me in my community. And so it comes back to leaning into you. If you're a hardcore extrovert and you love engaging, create the groups, have the conversations and the question starters, all of these things. And if you're not, consistently put it out there and be there when they need you.
Yeah. It's interesting. One of the diagnosis things that have happened with me through my therapeutic journey is that object permanence issue, because a lot of people who have ADHD feel substantial guilt because it is that out of sight, out of mind, right? When you're in my attention, there is nothing besides you in my attention. But unfortunately, when you're not in my attention, my brain doesn't think about you. And that's made it difficult in relationships too, because it's not that I don't love you dearly. I'm just not thinking about you. And it has nothing to do with you personally. It's just how my brain works. So you've built this community, you have people coming up to you at conferences. Now is where we're really going to go ahead and push the accelerator on this whole system, which is how do you take your community and turn them from loyal fans into actual people paying you money to do what Summer does best?
Yeah, so systems are huge, and this is for neurotypicals as well as neurodivergence. So when we think about systems, I know that my best lead gen is when somebody sees me speak, because they hear my stories, they get to see me. Because when I'm on stage, I am a fuller, more authentic me than I am when I'm sitting around at happy hour having a drink talking about weather, because that takes a lot of energy. Being on stage talking about what I love, that is just my happy place. So they see that authentic version of me, which I use a program called Talkadot. And if anybody does speaking or training, cannot recommend it enough. And they will fill out a couple of questions and it lets me look to see who is interested in hiring speakers, because that is my predominant income, is as keynote speaking and training. And then following up, hey, you put that you hire speakers and you saw me speak, would love to have a conversation. And so being intentional about doing that follow-up. When I'm reaching out and I see somebody post something that it's interesting and I want to engage, if it's more of what we would consider a cold call, I don't reach out and ask them to buy anything. I just reach out, have a conversation, and at no point in the conversation do I try and sell my services. Because what I found is, again, I'm trying to find my people. My people will know it when they find me. And so having these conversations and getting excited about people, because let's face it, who's our favorite topic? Us. And so when somebody shows up and they're really interested in us, truly interested in what we do, that's flattering, that's engaging. And so when you're trying to build these communities, when you're trying to convert somebody from they have been in the kind of the bleachers watching into you want to bring them on as a partner, get to know them, offer value. And then when I am putting out my videos or my mailers or anything like that, there's always a snippet at the bottom that talks about, do you want to work with me? Click here. Let's have a conversation as to what that looks like. Because going back to luxury hospitality, make it easy for people to say yes. It's infuriating when I go to a website and there's no contact information. The only way to get in touch with somebody is to fill out a form. I hate that, because when I want to talk to you, again, Matt, we talked about it earlier, you are the only thing that I'm thinking of. And so I don't want to fill out a form because then I'm going to forget. And so make it easy for people to get in touch with you and let people know what you do. This is, for many of us, we've been taught that we need to be humble and we don't need to brag and we don't need to talk about what we do well. I disagree with that wholeheartedly, because if somebody's coming to me, I want them to know I'm a professional coach or I'm a coach for professional neurodivergent individuals. I'm not a life coach, and you quickly pick up that empathy and patience are not my strong suit. Yeah. And so if you're needing empathy and patience, I'm probably not the person for you. And so use your message and use that authenticity of you to help people understand whether you're a good fit for them before they ever have a conversation with you.
We made a switch about 6 months ago where people gained access to my calendar for what we call a free strategy session. And that's what it is. And you answer some questions so that I can prepare for the call. And I would say that 75% of them are people who are just looking for advice. Great.
Mm-hmm.
That's what the free strategy session is for. But listen, 25% of them are ready to buy something. And I wouldn't have gotten in front of them if I would have been, what can I do to get you in this car today? Sort of sales crap that people are still doing, right? That I love that you said in luxury hospitality, you want to make it as easy as possible for people to say yes. That gatekeeping that a lot of people have done is okay. That might have worked in the 1900s, as my kids like to remind me. I was born in the 1900s. Yeah, I know. But it doesn't work today. It doesn't work today. The level of openness and receptiveness that you need to have is very, very important. Okay.
Well, and one more thing. So with that 75%, you're also laying down seeds. If in the future they need you, they know that they can come back to you. It's that really is offering value without asking for anything in return.
Yeah. Well, and I think all great salespeople, first off, you have to know how to ask for business, and that's vitally important. But really nowadays you're a farmer, that whole hunt and kill thing, that worked with boomers really, really well in old Gen X. It really did, because that's the culture they lived in. But Gen X and lower now, we want to build relationships with people we want to do business with. And that's really what this whole rise above the noise philosophy is. How do you show up as yourself, build an audience, build a fan base so that people are interested in buying from you? You look at Taylor Swift as a great example. Taylor Swift doesn't have to sell any tickets. Her fans sell out all of her shows all the time. Yes. Now, does she still ask for business? I don't think she really has to anymore. I think business just shows up on her plate. But she's been so focused and so fan oriented. I love using her as an example because videos show up in my brain cleanse. I usually do TikTok or Instagram Reels just to kind of laugh at things and whatever, just to reset. And I'll see videos of her like just hanging out with her fans. And of course they're blown away, but that's how you really build a following. That's how you build that fan base, is you have to do what we jokingly call fan maintenance here at ProudMouth. And part of that is just being open and receptive and communicative.
Yeah.
Now I'm going to ask you my favoriteest question. And I don't always ask this, but I do enjoy asking it, which is, what should I have asked you that I didn't?
You coming out with big hitting questions. I think when we consider helping people rise above the noise, I think a question that needs to get asked, and you've hinted at this quite a few times, is, are you an individual that needs to be given permission? And if you are, who do you need to be given permission from? So my husband, he is not an entrepreneur. He has no desire to be an entrepreneur. And we live in very different professional spaces. But I will go to him and say, hey, I want to spend this money for my business. Here are all of the reasons why. Here's the pros, here's the cons. What should I do? And he gives me permission. He knows that is his role, is to give me permission, not in the I'm the man way, but in the he's my thought partner. And he stopped me from making a couple of decisions that probably weren't the best. Because in the beginning, when I started my business, I was spending a lot of money on a lot of things that didn't show fruit. And so if you are an individual that does need to be given that validation that your decision is okay, and this is really important with neurodivergent individuals, because so many of us have been told that we're too much, we're too aggressive, we're too bossy, we're just too much. And so we're constantly pulling ourselves in because that's the feedback that we've gotten, which means that validation, that permission to bet on ourselves can be really, really important. So ask yourself, who is that person that, one, you trust their opinion? They're not just going to say yes to everything, but you can loop them in and say, hey, this is one of the things that I'm struggling with, working on it. And I would like to use you as a thought partner. And when I ask a question, I really want your opinion. And then be okay leaning into having that partnership that they don't maybe have no impact on your business whatsoever, but you can use them when you do need that validation or you do need that permission.
Yeah. Wow. That was a very, very good answer to that question.
Thank you. You put me on the spot on that one. I was a little nervous, so it makes me feel good.
I actually, I do that on purpose. So in in interviewing, one of the things, and so I have like all of these interviewing heroes, and one of them is actually Columbo. And I know that sounds ridiculous because it's a television show and many people don't know what I'm talking about, but he always used to do something. So he'd go into the room and he'd interrogate somebody, not like in a mean way. He'd be asking them questions. And then he'd be like, okay, yeah, well, I'll see you later. And he would turn around and walk away, and he'd put his hand on the door and he'd say one more thing. Yep. Because they've already disarmed themselves, right? They've already let their guard down because they think it's over, right? Mm-hmm. And I'm doing that purposefully. I mean, you can tell I'm kind of trying to wrap the show up a little bit. So Summer lets her guard down. I asked that question because, one, we get real answers. And I'm not saying that the answers that you didn't give previously weren't real, but I like that unpreparedness. I like that a whole bunch. And I've found that we as professionals, especially experts, when we're working with people, whether you're prospecting, whether you're providing service, ask that question towards the end of the meeting or when you find an opening, because people will tell you what they really want to talk about, and that's what you should be talking about. Okay, let's go over those 3 actionable strategies again. So I can punt this to you, or I can read them. What do you want to do?
So if I remember correctly, and it's lead with your weird, and deliver the magic and say something that they need to hear.
That's it. Yeah, that's freaking awesome. All right. Wonderful. All right, Summer. Well, listen, I know that there's going to be a whole bunch of people who are listening to this who are like, damn, she is freaking awesome. I need her in my life. Who should call you? And number 2, where should they go?
Okay, so there's 2 different groups that should call me. The first group is if you need a phenomenal leadership keynote speaker or trainer. That is part of my personal mission, is to reduce the impacts of toxic behaviors in the workplace, and I do that through leadership. The second is if you are a neuro-curious or neurodivergent professional and you're wanting to figure out how to work with an organization, through an organization, or you're a leader of neurodivergent or neurocurious individuals. I would love to have a conversation about coaching for that. Now, either of those, you can find me at summerjelinek.com. And there's also going to be some links in the show notes that for those of you that are neurocurious, it's a self-assessment. There's one for ADHD, one for autism. It can help you show you a little bit more about how your brain works. And then finally, a gift for anybody that would like it, my book, Unlocking the Magic of Leadership. If you go to Unlocking the Magic of Leadership /MYF for Manage Yourself First, you'll get the first 3 chapters, which is all about managing yourself first, emotional intelligence, and how to best work with and through others.
And just like you said, we'll make sure that we have all of those links in our show notes. I also highly recommend that you do sign up for Summer's newsletter. Follow her on socials because she actually has a wonderful social media presence. But with that, everybody, that is a wrap for our episode of Rise Above the Noise. If this conversation gave you something to think about, share it with somebody who would appreciate it. Make sure you subscribe so that you don't miss our next episode. For insights and more exclusive content, head to the playbook link. So we're going to create the Summer Playbook. And if what Summer talked to you about today, you need to download that puppy and make sure that you can go ahead and find out how you can be more magical in the world. And I want to say, listen, thank you very much for listening. Now go make your voice impossible to ignore. So I'm Matt Halloran, and I'll see you on the other side of the mic very soon. Hey, don't touch that dial yet. Before you go, get a copy of the tools and strategies to rise above the noise shared by our guest in this week's playbook. To claim your free playbook and access our growing collection, go to proudmouth.com/playbook. Hey, thanks for tuning in. Here's to rising above the noise, one episode at a time.